Welcome to the SkySwitch University webinar series. Good morning, everyone. This is Emily Vasquez of SkySwitch. And on behalf of the entire SkySwitch team, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us in learning more about the Cloud2Edge solution and how it can aid in increasing your quality of service, reduce customer care interactions, and reduce hardware costs, in addition to the other key benefits we'll be discovering today. I'll be moderating today's presentation, and I'm very pleased to welcome today's presenter, Jim O'Loughlin, Vice President of Edge Solutions. Also on this webinar today are Jason Jones of SkySwitch and Dan Barry of 888 VoIP. Jim will be presenting his slide deck, and afterward, we will be conducting a Q&A session. So I encourage all of you out there on this call today to type any questions you may have in the questions widget section of your GoToMeeting control panel at any point during this webinar. And as always, we're recording today's webinar, which will be posted on our YouTube channel and sent to all participants via email this afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Jim. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Emily, and good morning, everyone. As Emily said, my name is Jim O'Loughlin. I'm with Ribbon Communications, VP of Edge Solutions. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ribbon, I was actually with Edgewater Networks, and we were acquired in September of last year. So we're now very happily part of the Edgewater family. I'm sorry, part of the Ribbon family. This morning, what we're going to do is we're going to cover our Cloud2Edge solution and our network orchestration application, which is a very powerful tool for service providers to use and fits extremely well with the way SkySwitch has put together the application for your teams and your customers. Just to cover off to beginning, I'd like to give an idea of what is network edge orchestration before we get into Cloud2Edge. Essentially, there's two components in network edge orchestration. The first is the EdgeView Service Control Center, which is the cloud management tool or the element management tool that controls and monitors the applications and the performance of the network. And then the second component is the EdgeMarc Intelligent Edge device. Essentially, that's what you would put at a customer site to manage and monitor all of the performance of the network and all the applications running through the network. EdgeView itself is critical to the entire life cycle of the customer because it works from the provisioning perspective all the way through the renewal perspective, in that it provides your customers a better class of service and a better quality of experience, which means that renewals, as we all know, renewals for a happy customer are much easier than an unhappy customer. It provides real-time visibility into your network and real-time visibility into the performance of your voice services. And ultimately, it gives you reporting and analytics across your network to see how things are performing. Now, the beauty of the partnership that we have here between Ribbon and SkySwitch and 888 Cloudco is that you will be able to provide EdgeView as a hosted solution from SkySwitch, which means that you won't need to own and operate the EdgeView yourself. That will be provided for you, which eliminates a considerable amount of cost and things that you would need to provide on your own network and in your own data center will now be taken over, but it provides you all the same functionalities that you had it yourself. As far as the EdgeMarc devices go, basically they're a very powerful device with a very small footprint at the customer site that is basically a security, routing, and analytics device. It runs 7 different applications on the device, which enable you to provide a very solid quality of experience that also allows you to monitor performance of all calls, monitor the quality of the service, and also gives you access or remote access to those sites in order to do troubleshooting and trouble resolution. They're SD-WAN capable devices, and most recently we've introduced an EdgeMarc that is power over Ethernet or a PoE switch, which for smaller sites below, say, 12 seats, becomes very powerful because it allows you to deploy one piece of hardware that does the QoS, the routing, and ultimately the Ethernet switching for the voice phones. From an application perspective, there's four buckets that we look at that we feel that we provide value to your organization. The first is service assurance. The EdgeMarc provides you the ability to create a demarcation point between the network and the customer site. So essentially between the WAN and the LAN. And obviously, as we all know, it used to be the last mile was the biggest concern for performance and delivering service. But now it really gets down to the last 100 feet. So from a service assurance perspective, we're monitoring and measuring the quality of the broadband connections. And when things arise such as packet loss, jitter, any kind of interference within the data packets that can affect real-time communications, the EdgeMarc application, or the Network Edge Orchestration application, has the ability to not only monitor and help you correct it, but also automatically provide correction by moving, if you're using dual broadband connections, moving the service between the two links. So essentially, and we'll get a little more detail what that means, but essentially it allows you to maximize your customers' use, their experience, without them having to do anything on their end, which really becomes a key aspect of, if you're an IT director and you're buying voice services, data services, you want to make sure your customers' experiences are as solid as possible. And if there's issues that need to get resolved, you can shield those customers from those issues while you work to resolve those issues. So the service assurance piece is critical in order to provide, the most bulletproof network services that you can for your end user. From a security perspective, that's obviously critical in this day and age. And the EdgeMarc itself, like most enterprise session border controllers, was initially created as a security device. And it can be effective in preventing toll fraud, denial of service attacks, because essentially it is a voice over IP firewall. It can also be a data firewall, or it can interact with a data firewall that's already at the customer site. Again, giving the customer the maximum protection while giving you the maximum control over the customer experience. Ultimately, from an OpEx perspective, the real secret sauce of the application is giving the customers, or giving you as the service provider, the ability to minimize your operating costs. When you think about a typical deployment, you're probably rolling a truck to do the install. You may roll a truck during the troubleshooting. You may have a scenario where you're rolling a second truck or a third truck during install or troubleshooting. The fact that the EdgeMarc is an analytics device sitting at the customer site with access to the customer site means that not only can you do things like packet captures and collect data and statistics from that site to understand what's going on if there's an issue, but it also means when there's a need to get something resolved at that site, you have a trusted, secure device at the customer site, which allows you to, for example, access the IP phone to maybe reset the IP phone, change the configuration to the IP phone. If you have other data equipment on the site, you can access that remotely as well. So it gives you a lot of power from the NOC that you would normally be rolling out a technician with a truck. The side benefit of that means that you can keep your highly trained engineers within your network operations center and not worry about getting training out to your 10, 15, 20 technicians that may be in the field. Obviously, you want them to be aware and understanding how to resolve issues, but keeping the core voice knowledge at the core means that those people can be more productive throughout the day. Ultimately, what does this give you? It gives you new revenue streams. Obviously, the services and solutions that you get through SkySwitch are extremely important and are the core base of your revenue. But as we all know, as you grow your business, there's two ways to do that. There's gaining new customers or finding new solutions and new opportunities to give benefit to your existing customers. Well, the idea that you can give service assurance, resiliency, means that you can start to charge a premium from a revenue perspective on services, because customers obviously value redundancy as something that's worth paying for. But in addition, the security aspects, the monitoring aspects, and ultimately things like SD-WAN and our survivability feature, which we'll get into in a few slides, are other opportunities to generate new revenue at your customer base. As I mentioned, the Edgewater Service Control Center takes you through these four bullets. It takes you from provisioning and management, which allows you to configure your devices and set your configurations universally across your customers so that you don't have to have an engineer individually configuring each device. And it gives you some universal experience so that you don't have somebody trying to understand quote unquote best configuration, you set the gold configuration at once, and then you push those configurations to the customer site. It also allows you to manage those configurations so that if in fact you have a need to change those configurations, you can push those changes across the board, across your network to every customer at one time. So you don't have to worry about going one by one to change configurations of customer sites. The monitoring and alerting is critical because not only do we give you real-time visibility as to what's going on, every phone call that comes through an EdgeMarc gets about 120 statistics recorded every 10 seconds on the LAN side and the WAN side, which is extremely powerful in helping you determine any issues that you're having. Are they based on the wide area connection, or is it your customer's local area network? And then ultimately, you can set triggers on those metrics that determine if I breach a threshold, if my MOS score drops below a certain, say 3.5, what I want to do is I want to start an automated process. Again, that becomes critical because you're identifying problems as they happen. The automated process means you could say initiate a packet capture, which means you can immediately do a data collection as to what was going on at the customer site when something happened. But we also have something called a ring buffer, which allows you to capture what happened prior to the issue. So you literally, like a DVR, you could rewind the network through the buffer and get a picture before and after, immediately before and after the incident. Tremendously powerful to have that data delivered to your engineers when a trouble is detected. And then again, finally, from a troubleshooting and remediation perspective, what good is a troubleshooting tool if you don't have the tools to resolve the problem? That's where the power of having that device, that demarcation point at the customer site, becomes incredibly powerful, because not only do you have the data, you understand what's going on, but you have access to the site remotely to resolve the issues. Or if you ultimately need to send somebody on site, you know why you're sending them there, and you have direct, that person has direct marching orders to what they need to get done. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the fact that you're looking at these analytics across the case of weeks or months, depending on how much storage you allocate for EdgeView, you have the ability to look across the network and determine, are there issues? You're having issues consistently over certain types of access. Are you having issues over certain customer sites? It allows you to get a broader kind of 50,000 foot view as to what's going on across the network over time. And then as we mentioned, because the pairing of the EdgeView and the EdgeMarc pairs exactly with those same 4 bullets. From an EdgeMarc perspective, we have auto detection. So you create the configurations in the EdgeView. When you plug that device in at the customer site, that configuration can be downloaded through auto detection and zero-touch provisioning. From a service provisioning perspective, you can turn on and turn off features and functionality in the EdgeMarc from EdgeView. So it gives you the ability, under the Cloud2Edge model, we would ship you these devices fully licensed with all the applications. You only need to turn them on. You don't need to send out a technician to launch any services. You don't need to add new licenses. They're fully licensed and essentially chargeable when you use those features, but easily turned on and off through EdgeView. Again, the source of all the statistics is the EdgeMarc. So the EdgeMarc, which is viewing both voice and data, because your broadband connections are coming into it as the first point of access, you're going to see all the statistics coming from the calls and the data coming through that device. A powerful tool to understand what's going on in your network. And then finally, from an interoperability perspective, depending on if we're talking about what's at the customer site, essentially the EdgeMarc is a full SIP proxy, a full back-to-back user agent. So you can basically do header manipulation in the device if you need to interface with any SIP devices at the customer site. From the different applications that run on the EdgeMarc, this gives you a quick picture of all the things that come standard based on an EdgeMarc. Basically, it's a WAN router, a SIP firewall, there's a NAT and DHCP server. As I mentioned, it's got the back-to-back user agent, and then the last 3 components, which are kind of the secret sauce: the voice quality monitor, the traffic shaper, which basically is critical if you're deploying services in a low-speed bandwidth environment, where you want to make sure you're protecting the voice traffic from data overrun. So we will absolutely, using the traffic shaping, make sure there's enough bandwidth on that link to provide a top quality connection for the voice, slowing down or basically backing off the data applications in favor of the voice. And then ultimately PSTN gateway. So if you have customers who are looking for example, they want to do voice over IP services, but they still got door buzzers, alarms, other things that require analog, that can be provided through the EdgeMarc. Or if they ultimately want to have a traditional PSTN gateway backup, whereas they want to have a POTS line in case of emergency, you can have a POTS line terminate into the device and then route calls that way. One example being 911 calls. If you had a 911 call and you had all broadband failure, you could route 911 calls through to that POTS line. Just a quick picture of the capabilities of an EdgeMarc from an operational perspective. As you can see, they're small devices, a quarter rack, 1 RU high. The PoE device, because of the number of ports, is a full rack wide. Each is capable of handling 300 concurrent calls. An advantage of the Cloud2Edge model is you do not need to license this. So if in fact you've got any experience with EdgeMarcs in the past where you would buy a 5-call, a 10-call, a 25-call device, in the Cloud2Edge model, in the relationship we have with SkySwitch, every device is shipped with a full 300 call capability. So you don't have to worry about setting up licenses or sizing your customer site. The only issue is obviously if you have the high class problem of having a customer who has a need for more than 300 concurrent calls. We have devices that are larger, which will be on the next page, but essentially you get full access to the full gigabit ports on both WAN connections. They are electrical and optical, and then there's WAN connectivity on the backside. And all the 2900s are SD-WAN capable. Take it to the next step. One point on the other, the 2900A, this is a device which has analog capabilities, which is then mirrored by the 4800 series, which has analog and PRI or T1 capabilities. So if you need PRI or T1 capabilities, we have that solution as well. And then finally, for a large-scale enterprise site, we can do up to 2,000 calls on a 7301, or we have virtual EdgeMarcs. So now to take a step into our SD-WAN application, which we spent a lot of time looking at the SD-WAN market. As you all know, SD-WAN is a fairly crowded market, and our goal was not to get into head-to-head with the existing SD-WAN providers. What we wanted to do was find a way to provide value to the market that wasn't currently being addressed. So, as you all know, SD-WAN is a very highly talked about discussion. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people say they want it, but honestly, a lot of people aren't quite sure why they need it, but it's heavily talked about. So if you look at the typical market today, it was originally created for MPLS replacement, significant cost savings around MPLS replacement. And as you can see, the vendors who I've listed on the bottom here all focus on that component of MPLS replacement. However, when you look at the small business segment, it's a different world, right? They're not using MPLS. They're not connecting sites. Their main reason for needing bandwidth is to connect to things like Salesforce.com, hosted applications, Office 365, applications that are cloud-based, not necessarily connecting office to office or office back to a corporate location. So we looked at that from the factor of small businesses, medium enterprise businesses really need to focus on what is the best way they can get value out of the broadband connections and how they can keep their business running and maximize the performance of their network in their business environment. So we looked at it from the perspective of prioritization of real-time traffic, service quality, resiliency, as we've talked about before, which is really a critical component, which, since the beginning of telecom, backup and resiliency has been something that people look for. And ultimately, getting a price point that's going to fit the small business market. These other providers, which, provide very solid SD-WAN services, will cost you into the multi-$100s per month per site, which definitely prices itself out of a, 20, 30 seat enterprise customer. So we compared the two sites, the two types of customers as to what do they need in each segment. Enterprise customers have a secure corporate WAN, they actively manage it, they have a staff and a team that can actively manage it. In fact, a lot of large enterprises buy their own SD-WAN software and operate independently of a carrier. Small businesses, just the opposite. In fact, many small businesses are probably relying on you as a partner to give them their IT and their voice solution and their IT and their voice expertise, right? That's why they come to you as partners. On the enterprise side, they're looking for savings on MPLS. Small businesses aren't buying MPLS. They're not looking to connect site to site. Business continuity in a large enterprise covers gamut from federal regulations to data protection, all these very complex solutions. Small businesses think it's valuable, but the problem is the cost of providing resiliency, redundancy can sometimes exceed the value of it. Meaning, in a sense, when you get into a car accident, sometimes your car is totaled. It costs more to fix it than to just buy a new one. So we were very sensitive to that side of things, to look at it and saying, hey, in the end, both care about the value of their data, the real-time applications, but the issue of the ability to pay for it becomes critical. So what does our SD-WAN incorporate? 3 components. Stateful SIP Transfer, which is the ability to keep voice calls active even if you have a complete failure on a link, or if you see a link degrading. Business policy control, which is the ability to manage and prioritize other applications across the network. And then finally, survivability, if you have a complete IP network outage, what are your alternatives? What can we do to keep your business up and running? Stateful SIP Transfer is essentially when we take, if you're running your voice on, let's say, link A, and you see that link degrading or you see a WAN failure, we want to make sure that degradation doesn't cause any loss of calls or any disconnection of calls. So we move those calls over to link B, which would be the better performing link. Obviously, the business benefits there are, if you're on the phone with a customer, if your customer is on the phone with their customer, they don't want to lose calls, they don't want to lose business, and it's a customer satisfaction, right? You can imagine what it's like to be the IT manager or the office manager of a business where everybody's phone suddenly goes dead because there was a broadband failure. That person's day is miserable while they're trying to figure out what happened. In this case, they still may have a broadband failure, but the users don't know it because their traffic has been transferred over to the secondary connection. So how does it work? Essentially, the EdgeMarc continuously monitors the link quality of that location and looking for packet loss, anything that's going to cause issues around real-time communication. If that threshold is exceeded, right? If that tolerance for failure is exceeded, the calls are then transferred from one WAN connection to the next. Essentially, what happens is in 1 to 3 seconds, the user might hear a click, they might hear silence for 1 or 2 seconds, but then the call is back up and running. It's very powerful in the fact that they don't know that something's happened and their business continues on and they're completely oblivious to the fact that there was a failure. When the quality of link A is restored or the link itself comes back up, and that link is running in a top performing manner again, the calls just get transferred back to the main link. So if you think about this from a selling point, the value of a dropped call can be huge, right? If you're a small business and you're taking customer calls in as they call into, if you're a plumbing or supply company, electrical supply company, customer calls in to see if you have a part, to see if they can hire you out for something, the call drops. That business is relying that customer is going to call them back, right? So any kind of inbound calls, that becomes critical to make sure that you maintain that connection with the customer. If it's a contact center, you may never get that customer back, or if you do, they need to go back through the process of the IVR and everything that got them to where they were. So they're very frustrated because they may get put to the end of the wait queue. There may be an issue of, and especially if all calls are dropped, then the wait queue becomes very large. So as you can see on this slide, there's quite a few reasons why the simple maintaining of a phone call across a broadband connection becomes critical to the business, critical from a revenue perspective and for customer satisfaction. The next component, the business policy or application prioritization, is basically an expansion of our network edge orchestration concept, which is our initial application was to prioritize the voice over all data. So we made sure that if you were on a DSL connection with slow broadband, that those voice calls were always going to take priority over data. Well, so now what we've done is we've expanded that capability to say, you know what, let's take other real-time applications, or let's take other mission critical applications and allow the user to prioritize those. In some cases, voice may not be the most important thing to come into that site. It might be inventory management. If it's a warehouse, it may be, you know, an SAP application. So we now give the ability to prioritize by URL, IP address, or port. So you could even get to the port, the position where you've prioritized, say, in a hospital environment, the emergency room is prioritized over the billing office. So if the emergency room is trying to send x-rays over a broadband connection, those ports, those IP addresses are going to get priority over whatever the billing office is doing. So it gives you a lot of granular control over how you do these prioritization. And it also allows you to prioritize, as we've talked about with the stateful SIP transfer, to be able to prioritize the voice of the data applications the same way. So let's go back to that example of a hospital environment. You have two broadband connections coming into the site. You're getting poor performance on link A. You can move the critical applications to link B. And this really guarantees you high performance, which is ultimately what the goal is. The benefits are, you know, if you're offering UC services, it allows you to prioritize all those applications. If you're offering if that user is using any kind of mission critical applications, you can prioritize those, even to the point of things like LTE backup. If, you know, or let's, for example, say you have two broadband connection options. One might be 500 meg, but let's say there's a redundant option which is only 100 meg. You can set up your application so that mission critical transfers over to the link B onto the 100 meg connection, but so that it doesn't get too congested, you can have all non-mission critical stay on link A. So it allows you to determine which applications go to which link, not just based on what's performing, but if one link is more expensive or more precious in a sense, you can make sure that only the key applications are utilizing that link. And these controls can be set by you as the service provider, or ultimately they can be set by the end user if you want to open up the portal to them. Survivability is something that is it's not new for us. It's something we've had in place for a while, but it's incredibly powerful as you're talking about the idea of moving people off of traditional voice over onto IP voice. Again, the main component here is the idea of being able to reroute if you have a broadband failure. So in a survivability environment, it's not just the ability to go from link A to link B, but if you deployed two EdgeMarcs at a site, let's say you have two diverse service entrances for broadband, you can have one EdgeMarc back up the other EdgeMarc. So it allows you to use diverse service entrances in a campus environment to the benefit of resiliency and redundancy. But it also allows you to fail over to analog components, which again, if you have a customer who's not necessarily, if they're worried about moving to IP, even though we all know IP is by no means new or untested, but let's say they're still worried about that, you can have them reroute over to an analog portal if need be, or PRI if need be. But the other component is it allows you to maintain certain PBX features if you have a complete broadband failure. Meaning, if you have a site that loses link A and link B, or they only have link A and they lose that, they can still do desk-to-desk dialing. Becomes a subtle but important selling feature in the fact that if you're competing with, or if you're trying to replace a PBX environment with a hosted PBX environment, now you have the ability to make it perform exactly as a PBX would be, because if a backhoe cuts your analog or your PRI connection today into your PBX, you're going to lose all external voice connectivity, but you can still dial desk to desk. Now with an EdgeMarc installed on site, you can still dial desk to desk. Again, subtle but important when you're trying to compete with to bring all functionality of the old environment to a new environment. So in the way we deploy SD-WAN, interestingly enough, we can do all of this at the edge. There's no need for a core concentrator. There's no need for something deployed in the SkySwitch network or your network to bond the devices at the far end. Everything is done at the edge. and that's due to the intelligence of the EdgeMarc and the policies that get pushed to it from EdgeView. So what does that mean from a bonding perspective? It means that if you're running an EdgeMarc, you can run both links, broadband links as active-active, which is critical because if a customer is paying for 2 broadband links, they want to use 2 broadband links. So in this environment, we're looking at WAN 1, where we're seeing traffic performing, as you can see, the priority traffic is on WAN 1, the routine traffic is on WAN 1 as well. But let's say WAN 1 degrades. We've now moved the traffic to WAN 2 because WAN 2 is performing more solidly. And then when the correction happens, then you're back onto WAN 1. Now, this graph doesn't show it, but you could also be running other traffic on WAN 2. So you can be running voice on one, data on the other, or voice and data on both. The difference between the way we deploy this and the way other environments deploy broadband connections, they may talk about bonding, but bonding requires you to have a device on the other end to assemble the packets and make sure you're getting one set of packets, because essentially, in many times when you're bonding, you're sending duplicate packets over both links in order to allow the best performing link to deliver those packets. In our environment, we allow you to fully utilize both links, and then when there's a priority situation, we would push WAN 2 traffic out of the way in order to put priority 1 traffic from WAN 1 to WAN 2, essentially using our traffic shaping to prioritize the traffic. But in the meantime, when all is running well, you're looking at an environment where you're fully utilizing without duplicating packets on both links. And it also allows you to have an environment where you do not have to have symmetric links. So you don't have to have 2 100 meg connections or 2 1 gigabit connections. You could have a 1 gig from one service provider and a 500 meg from another if you're looking for diverse routes or diverse types. If one link was traditional broadband and the second one is LTE, it doesn't require them to be symmetric. So, and then from a control and management perspective, EdgeView allows you to visualize all this, control this, and gives you or your end user, if you open up the portal to them, the ability to see reporting on the health of the WAN, which, as you can see, basically it's a little bit small, but you can see on the top screen you have the 2 thinner green lines, which are WAN 1 and WAN 2, and then the fatter green line, which is the overall performance of your total bandwidth. And then up on the top corner, it shows you the performance of each link, the percentage of availability, the ability to determine which link is running well, and if there was a failure, overnight, if you had an issue, you can look back in the morning and determine what happened and how the traffic performed. The second slide shows you each of the queues, because essentially we're giving the ability to prioritize traffic so we can have a high, medium, and low priority queue, which allows you, obviously, as we've talked about, it allows you to take your priority traffic and move it to the high priority queue, but it also allows you to take low priority traffic. So for example, if your customers allow employees to run Pandora or Spotify music services, but there's a congestion issue, you could deprioritize real-time music streaming, or you could drop real-time music streaming. But if the bandwidth is running fine and it's not an issue, they can continue to do it. The same thing with other less priority applications within the environment. Interestingly enough, you could also prioritize certain things. So for example, you could prioritize the chairman's or the president's video conference in their office or the boardroom over other types of video traffic, because as we talked about, you can prioritize on port or IP address, source or destination. So it gives you the ability to get very creative in the way you run your network, but also gives you the ability to get in and understand the way your customer does business and understand what's important to them, which obviously leads to other, more services opportunities for you to provide them, more consulting services, whatever your relationship is with that customer. Just a quick couple of use cases. Business continuity, we've talked a lot about that, but essentially, as we all know, tremendous amount of business is done over the phone. And if you lose that phone connection, you lose the ability to do business. So from a solution perspective, by adding a second wide area connection and using Stateful SIP Transfer, you give the ability to ensure that voice, any kind of call dropped is a non-issue. But it also gives you a chance to if you're an agent for the broadband or you have the broadband network as your own network, it allows you to sell them more broadband connections. it allows you to sell a premium service in that resiliency. So essentially, you're going to help their business, but obviously they're going to see value in that business, which generates, it's a win-win situation. They get a more bulletproof network, you increase revenue on a per customer basis. Contact center, I think, is fairly straightforward. If you're running a contact center, there's a tremendous amount of money sitting in that contact center, whether it's an orders-based contact center or customer support-based contact center. It is the face of your business. It's the way you're going to get revenue from people calling in. Voice calls, not only just voice calls, but applications, right? If they're using a cloud-based CRM, if you're providing them a CRM, you want to make sure that that data is prioritized, but also you want to make sure that that voice is solid. So again, by adding a second WAN connection, by taking advantage of the stateful SIP transfer for continuity, and then ultimately using application prioritization to prioritize your CRM application. I mean, we've all been on customer service calls where you're talking to a customer, or you're talking to an agent and they say, I'm sorry, my system is slow. Well, let's see if we can help them solve that problem by prioritizing that application over other things in the building. Again, when it comes to revenue, call centers are kind of the sweet spot for service providers, right? Because you're absolutely a part of their business. You're absolutely enabling them to provide a great customer experience, and they're willing to pay for it. So being able to play in the call center and the CRM space is huge. And just as a side note, not shown on here, is call centers now have obviously become not just call centers, but contact centers, which a lot of data-focused interaction between chat, web conferencing, WebRTC, all of those applications can play into the idea of application prioritization. Finally, one last use case, which is really talking about industrial sensors. This just gives you an example of the fact that it's not always voice, right? In the case of a warehouse using industrial centers, let's say a refrigeration warehouse, and you have alarms set up in your different temperature meters within different refrigeration units within the warehouse, you want to make sure if there's a failure of a refrigeration unit and the value of the product that's being refrigerated, whether it be pharmaceutical or food or whatever you're trying to keep cold, you want to make sure that data gets through, and you want to make sure it's prioritized. And if for whatever reason there's a failure of a link, you want to make sure it gets through on the backup link. So this is a class example where the ROI in this environment can be very clear. If somebody's refrigerating something, there's a cost to them if they lose it. It's a total loss. So these types of environments become critical as well, and I think that this plays well into that. And again, this is all these capabilities are encompassed in the SD-WAN solution that we deliver. So just to touch on briefly on just the idea of go-to-market strategies, we believe that both the Cloud2Edge environment, which is the idea of that you're deploying this service in a subscription model and a very flexible model, minimizing the operational cost for you, tied to our SD-WAN solution, really gives you the ability to create a very positive cash flow environment and monetize service assurance and business continuity. Right, so it takes you as the service provider, as the solutions partner, to the next level as to, I'm not just providing voice, but I'm really changing the way you do business, or I'm helping and supporting the way you do business. And combining these together in the platform that SkySwitch has set up makes it extremely easy to develop a go-to-market strategy that helps your customers. It allows you to be very cost effective, but yet still be high margin. Again, it's the example of a service that you could put together for a customer, managed service assurance. You have the EdgeMarc on site that allows you to differentiate the site because you have monitoring and management, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, and all the analytics and statistics. Bundling that with your voice solutions allows you to tout the fact that you're managing and monitoring that site, and you're adding true value. It's not they're going to call you when there's an issue and then you're going to respond. You can actually be proactive in understanding when there's an issue, and whether it be a quality issue or a failure issue, and then you can go back quickly with resolution and solving the problem. I mean, I've said it quite often in telecom, it's not if there's going to be an issue, it's when there's going to be an issue. The issue is not, do you have 100% uptime, because nobody can claim that. The issue is when you have a problem, how well do you resolve it and how quickly can you resolve it? And that's what your customers rely on you for. From a service offering perspective, essentially it's deploying an EdgeMarc on the customer site using broadband connections, whether it be broadband or LTE from a business continuity perspective. It makes it very easy. Oh, sorry about that. Too many builds. It's a very easy deployment model. It allows you to quickly get a customer up and running using the EdgeMarc and the zero-touch provisioning components. But the power is tremendous in what you're giving by putting that device there. From an operational cost, it's going to drive down your costs. You look at the cost of implementation goes down, the elimination of truck rolls, the ability to troubleshoot from a customer care perspective, and then ultimately churn. I'm sure there's people on the call right now that run into the issue of 30-day churn, right? So that you're trying to get the customer up and running, there's challenges, there's problems, the broadband connection may not be working the way you want, you're not quite sure what's going on. Ultimately, the customer gets frustrated and walks away. So your issue is how to reduce that 30-day churn or past 30-day churn to make sure that all the effort you've put into selling that customer and convincing them that your business is the way to go does not become a 100% cost with no revenue associated, right? So the fact that you can turn around any customer who potentially might have canceled in the first 30 days, that allows you to maintain that, let's say, 36 months worth of top line revenue that you're going to get from them. By the same token, there's probably customers on this call who will tell me, I don't lose customers in the first 30 days because we make sure they're up and running. Well, the question then becomes, what was the cost it took you to get them up and running? If you have a set of tools and devices that reduce that significantly, again, you still have a happy customer. They're impressed by the fact that you never quit and you made sure that service worked, but now you've done it at a much lower cost. So you're able to be more productive with your team. So ultimately, for you, you're providing a service assurance and SD-WAN solution that is valuable to your customer. It's definitely going to allow you to differentiate between you and your competitors. And again, the environment that SkySwitch has built, and again, you can imagine I deal with a lot of different service providers in this space, but the environment that they've built, the ease of use that they've put in front of you as partners is tremendous, and it's really kind of exceeds what everybody else is doing out there from just a partnership perspective. That combined with a new set of tools and a new set of applications that you can sell is going to allow you to leapfrog above your competitions and really providing a top quality service and a high margin service. And when it comes to, again, service support and service and issue remediation, you're going to be able to do that quickly and for a lower cost. Your customer is going to look at it from the perspective of, I've got a higher quality service. In fact, your service in some ways could become invisible because it works well. They're seeing how it supports the product. So there's the value of being able to provide them statistics and reports on a monthly basis through something like EdgeView. You can show them that everything's going well. Because sometimes when they don't hear from you, it's because everything's running well. You want to just make sure they know it's because everything's going well. You're going to provide security for them for having an EdgeMarc, which is a secure device. And then again, the business continuity benefits are very powerful. And then some of the slides here, which I won't spend too much time in, but just some examples of that you can use from the story as to helping sell these services, right? And I think you guys know your customers well, and you know the business that you provide for them. But there's a lot of very good selling points around the idea of service assurance. And we have a few slides here which can help you understand those values and kind of help your salespeople get the selling points around those. And then finally, I'm just going to, as we're kind of running slow time, I want to jump over to the Cloud2Edge component. So as we talked about, the traditional way of buying the network edge application, network edge orchestration application from us, and pretty much from many service equipment providers out there and software providers, was a CapEx environment. You buy the equipment, you make the investment up front, you buy the management software, you buy the devices, you go through the training process. All those things require you to have a fairly significant capital outlay up front, as then you collect the revenue from your customers over 36 to 48 months. Well, and that's a very viable model, but the Cloud2Edge model is more of a partnership model. Well, we take all those things that were CapEx and move them into OpEx. So now the environment is you make a minimal investment to put an EdgeMarc on site. So essentially, we're kind of sharing the cost on the hardware side, but these devices are now deployed with fully licensed up to 300 calls or up to 500 calls in the case of the 4800 series. They are fully licensed with Survivability and SD-WAN. You only need to turn them on and pay for them as you use them. This turns into a much more attractive cash flow model because everything is on a per month per site. Everything is wrapped into that per month and per site. So there's no need for you to go ahead and purchase a set of licenses for EdgeView, to go ahead and prepay for support and all those other things. This all gets blended into the monthly, which again, you're charging your customers monthly. It makes sense that we charge you monthly. And then, from an efficiency perspective, it makes life easier because in the past, if you had experience with ordering EdgeMarcs, you'd have to order a 5-call, a 10-call, a 15-call EdgeMarc. Now you can essentially standardize on an EdgeMarc model. If, for example, if you see the need for analog services out there, you may standardize on only 2900As, which is the analog device. If you see no need for analog, you just order a 2900E. But essentially, you're only presented with 3 or 4 SKUs, or in the case of the SkySwitch environment, they've made it even easier because things will be wrapped together in the portal. But it simplifies what you need to order. You don't need to pre-configure the devices based on the number of concurrent calls, which is critically important, right? Because if you have a customer who's growing, you don't want them to hit a blocking scenario. If you in the past had bought a 2900 with a 10-call license and they needed an 11th call, they weren't going to be able to make that 11th call because it's only licensed for 10, and you would have to take the time to get them an additional license, which is cost on your part and dissatisfaction on their part. So this model allows you to just open up the device and they're going to use it as they see fit. From a hardware perspective, the initial investment is considerably less. We've kind of taken a perspective of it's a shared success model. When you're successful, when you grow, then we see the revenue and we grow. So it works very well together. And again, it includes the service and support licenses tied together, which it's a critical component as far as just simplifying your business case. The typical CapEx model would be once a year you would pay a support renewal, which would require you to lay out capital for that support renewal. So essentially, that's the overview of our Cloud2Edge model and our SD-WAN capabilities and service assurance capabilities. Just to reiterate, I think the benefit you have as SkySwitch partners is that the way the SkySwitch is presenting this model to you by making it a hosted model, it provides so much flexibility, a much better cash flow environment, and ultimately the partnership in which they've got the APIs and their portal connected together with order management and everything else. It's just a model for success and ease of doing business, which that I think becomes critical as far as getting as many customers up and running per month as you can without having the process and the system slow you down. You want to make things as efficient as possible. And if you have the resources to turn up 10 more sites a month, you don't want the environment to be the reason why you can't. You want it solely to be about your ability to sell these services. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and that's the extent of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Emily, did you want to go through the Q&A at this point?
Yes. It looks like we have a lot of questions that have come in. So, and also Dan, if you'd like to jump in with the Q&A too, if there's anything that you would like to address. The first question we have is from Peter, and he asks, are there any pre-installation testing tools to help sell EdgeMarc?
So from a pre-installation perspective, when you put the EdgeMarc on site, you can get a sense of what the network looks like. We don't have any devices that will, we don't have any pre-installation devices. Essentially, you put the device on site and that will give you a tremendous amount of data about what's going on at that site. But no, we don't have anything that you would put out there before the EdgeMarc is installed.
Hi, this is Eric. I'd like to add, So we made an announcement about our software-based pre-assessment tool, which actually has just gone live as of yesterday, and I was about to send out an announcement on that. So the pre-assessment tool is always there for you to do an assessment before you're able to get any equipment installed.
So forget what Jim said.
Okay,
Well,
great.
Sorry about that. So that, and of course that's from SkySwitch, not from Cloud2Edge.
Eric, would it be appropriate to show the assessment tool in the Dash Manager?
I think that deserves its own webinar. Let's. I mean, we're happy if you send an email to support and ask for a demo. We'll arrange a demo for you if you need one. But it's pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, I know I'm saying that without you anyone on this call having the benefit of seeing the email I'm about to send, but that should make it self-explanatory, I hope.
Okay, we have another question from Ethan. He says, I'm curious, maybe I missed it. How would this device allow for extension-to-extension dialing even when the cable line goes down?
So Ethan, when the EdgeMarc is installed, it's monitoring all the signaling traffic that's coming in and out of the device and in and out of the site. So essentially the EdgeMarc learns the dialing plan of the site. So when there's a failure, because the EdgeMarc itself is a SIP device, that basically takes over call routing. We essentially have a small asterisk PBX coded into the device. So it would take over and understand how to route between devices. So that's exactly how it would operate.
Okay, we have another question. This one might be one that Eric can address. Carlos asks desk to desk while WAN is down. Is that supported with SkySwitch?
Yes. So actually, as long as the device on premise knows the dial plan, actually those calls would not. If the internet is down, those calls would not be going through the server in the cloud naturally. So you wouldn't have any of the server-based features like call recording or anything server side, but you would be able to talk between the two endpoints.
Right, you would basically get extension to extension, hold and transfer. So very basic PBX functionality. To Eric's point, you wouldn't get a lot of the value add you get from SkySwitch, but you would still be able to maintain some basic desk-to-desk dialing.
Okay, and we have another question from Gordon. He is asking, when Stateful SIP Transfer was originally released, it did not work on EdgeMarc's configured using transparent proxy mode. Is this still the case?
That's been resolved, and in the latest release of code, that's been fixed.
Great. We have another one from Daniel Millington, and he is asking, for those of us who are not MSPs, but legacy voice companies, we frequently get into small to mid-sized cloud deployments, say 10 to 20 endpoints, and they typically have their own IT guy. Their IT guy will frequently have a sonic wall, WatchGuard, or similar firewall in place. Is there a way to deploy one of these devices in front of their equipment and then give their IT guy access to certain aspects of the portal, or would this need to be a full replacement of the customer's existing firewall?
So that's a great question, Daniel. Yes, we can very easily coexist in that. It's in what we call a proxy ARP environment. So you put the EdgeMarc in front of the data firewall, and essentially all voice traffic would be handled by the EdgeMarc and then handed off to the IP phones, and then the data traffic would be then forwarded to the data firewall. So the user would not, or the customer would not have to change any of the rules or functionality of their data firewall. Everything would still be in place. We would just offload the voice before it gets to the data firewall. The reason why that can be an advantage is that a lot of data firewalls don't handle SIP voice very well. But so in this case, yes, we would just, we have what we call the proxy ARP configuration.
Okay. And Jim is also asking, Jim Sloan is asking, So this is a one router for everything on the net, servers, desktops, phones, etc. He just wanted to clarify if that was true because that wasn't the message that he was getting a few months ago.
So,
and he says also he came in a bit late, so he apologizes if it was covered earlier.
So no, Jim, it's basically can be used as a basic router. There may be environments where you want to use a more robust router, but we do have major service providers such as AT&T who use it as their routing endpoint for small medium businesses. If you're in a larger enterprise and you have a much more complex routing environment, then we would just be behind that router. But for the traditional small business, yeah, we definitely can be the terminating router or the edge router.
Okay, and from James, he is asking, can we get documentation on the proxy off arrangement? Because he would like to see how that's done before jumping in.
Yeah, absolutely. We can put together a configuration document on it, and it's proxy ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, ARP.
Okay. And another question from Eamon. He wants to know if we can use the device in POC to show the client the benefits of the device.
I think, is that more of a SkySwitch question?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Emily, I was spaced out for a second.
Yeah, the question was if we can use the device in POC to show the client the benefit of the device.
Okay, so I think that's more asking you whether we have like a not for resale kind of scenario as we did with Simple WAN. That's something we're currently working on. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Eric, let me jump in real quick. It's Dan with 888 VoIP. So what we've done in the past, we've been very successful on, is doing a demo walkthrough with our Cloud2Edge team of the network edge orchestration components of EdgeView. So that helped that partner understand best practices and use case models. And in several instances, we brought the end user on the remote session as well. So I think the quick answer is yes, I could support and facilitate that. My contact details will be shared after the slide. You could reach me at team@888VoIP.com and call into the number that's provided. This is Dan Barry with 888 VoIP.
Okay, great. And another question from Tim. He's asking if he missed the pricing. And that's actually something I think if you contact 888 VoIP, you can get more details on that.
Absolutely. I could share pricing information for the monthly recurring charges and then the hardware costs, and also the service add-ons like SIP Survivability, bringing in a legacy EdgeView device, and the SD-WAN add-on.
Great. And Larry is asking if SIP to PRI, if that's been verified.
I'm not sure what you mean by verified. I mean, it's an application that we deployed for quite a few years. So basically, a SIP trunk terminating and then PRI handoff. That's something that we do in production fairly often.
I will add that there are a number of SkySwitch customers that are using PRIs currently, so it works.
All right, and Peter wants to know more about the 4G and 5G LTE capabilities. He wants to know if there's a SIM slot in the hardware.
So Peter, essentially, what we do is we would recommend a third-party LTE device. The reason being is there's a couple reasons why we don't have a SIM card in the box. The first is the devices are typically deployed in an equipment closet, which can often provide a lot of radio interference, which means your LTE connection may not be that strong. Whereas some of the third-party companies like Accelerated Concepts and Cradlepoint have the ability to put these devices at the outer part of the building, and then using an Ethernet connection, they bring it back to us. So to us, it looks like an Ethernet connection. The value there being is you get a much stronger signal, a much stronger experience. The other piece is if we become a SIM, if we then host the SIM and put the LTE antennas in, it adds a tremendous amount of effort on our part to then be compliant with the voice, with the cellular networks, which we've kind of determined that it's more productive to leave that to the professionals like the access points and the accelerated concepts and their cradle points, because that's their main business focus. So, but yeah, so essentially to us, the LTE connection is a broadband connection. An Ethernet connection coming in from a third-party device.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have our last question here from Carlos. He says, regarding the traffic capability, is it a true 1 gigabyte by 1 gigabyte? Major factor we face as 1 gigabyte fiber becomes available and cost effective is that many devices can't handle the 1 gigabyte connection.
Yeah, so the throughput on each port is 1 gig. So it's not just a 1 gig port, it's a 1 gig throughput on each one.
All right, fantastic. That looks like those are all the questions that we have today. And again, we've recorded this session, so I'll be sending out the video to everyone this afternoon via email and uploading it to our YouTube channel. And before we conclude this webinar, I'd like to thank Jim and Dan for this great presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined in today. We hope to see you next time on the next SkySwitch webinar we're hosting. And thank you very much and have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.